The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old wood that morning. It always did in October. I was sitting at my table with my first cup of coffee, sorting through the mail the way I have every morning for 40 years. Bills. A circular, a card from my dentist reminding me about cleaning. Ordinary things for an ordinary Tuesday. Then I saw the envelope cream-colored. Heavy. The kind of cardstock that costs more than it should. My daughter's return address was printed in the upper left corner in a font I didn't recognize. Something formal, something new. I set down my coffee and opened it. I expected a seating chart question, maybe a note about the rehearsal dinner. Instead, I found a single folded card inside, and printed across the center in careful, deliberate letters that were 6 words. 6 words. We think it's best you don't come. The coffee cup hit the tile floor before I even felt it leave my hand. I didn't look down. I didn't move. I just sat there in that cinnamon-scented kitchen, holding a letter from my daughter, staring at her handwriting. The same handwriting I had watched form its very first letters at this exact table, 32 years ago. I couldn't breathe. The letter continued beyond those 6 words, but I couldn't read further. Not yet, because I needed a moment to understand something first. How does a mother get uninvited from her own daughter's wedding, while still being expected to pay for every last cent of it? To understand that, you need to understand who I am, and what I spent 68 years believing about family. My name is Margaret Calloway. Most people call me Maggie. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a school principal in a small town in Ohio. I retired 4 years ago with a good pension, a good reputation, and hands that knew how to work. 6 years ago, I lost my husband Robert to a heart attack. He was 67. He was healthy. He was there on a Thursday and gone by Friday morning. That is the kind of loss that doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. I spent my life in service to others. First to my students, then to my family. Always to Robert. I believed something simple and true, or so I thought. I believed that if you loved your family unconditionally, that love would always find its way back to you. I was wrong. What I hadn't understood was this. Love without conditions can be mistaken for love without consequences. And those are 2 very different things. But before any of that, let me tell you about Robert. And the dream we built together with our own 2 hands. Robert was not a complicated man. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He was a civil engineer by trade. He spent his days solving problems that most people never thought about. Drainage systems, load-bearing calculations, the quiet infrastructure that holds a community together. He had a gift for seeing what something could become before it was finished. He saw it on bridges. He saw it in people. He saw it in me long before I saw it in myself. On a Sunday afternoon in the fall of 1987, we were driving through the county after church. Diane was small then, asleep in her car seat in the back. Robert slowed the car without warning and pulled over onto the grass shoulder of a 2-lane road. I looked up. There was a Victorian house set back from the road. White, with green shutters and a wraparound porch that ran the full length of the front and curved around the side. At the peak of the roof, a weather vane, shaped like a rooster, caught the October light and turned slowly in the breeze. Robert sat there looking at it for a long moment. Then he turned to me and said, "Maggie, one day I'm going to give you a house with a porch like that, and we're going to drink coffee on it until we're too old to lift the cups." I laughed. I told him he was being ridiculous. He just smiled and pulled back onto the road, but neither of us forgot it. We didn't get the Victorian house. We never could afford it. Instead, we raised Diane in a modest brick ranch with a narrow front stoop and a backyard big enough for a garden. We saved carefully. We spent it modestly. We built a life that was small in square footage and large in everything that actually matters. When Robert died, the life insurance was modest. Enough to help, not enough to change anything. But tucked inside the folder the attorney gave me was something I hadn't known existed, a separate investment account. Robert had maintained it quietly for over 20 years. $214,000 accumulated in careful increments the way he did everything. Without fanfare, without announcement, with nothing but patience and intention. Inside the folder, in his handwriting, was a single index card. For Maggie's next chapter, don't waste it on anything that doesn't make you smile. I sat in that attorney's office and I wept in a way I hadn't allowed myself to weep since the funeral. Not from grief, though grief was there, but from the specific ache of being known. Of being loved so quietly and so thoroughly that even in death he had thought of me first. That money was mine, legally, completely, without question. My name alone was on every document. Robert had seen to that deliberately. I never touched the principal. I never discussed it as family money because it wasn't. It was a private gift from a man who had spent 31 years paying attention. There was one exception. 4 years before Robert died, I quietly transferred $40,000 to pay off the remainder of Diane's graduate school loans. I never told her where the money came from. I never mentioned it to anyone. I simply did it, the way mothers do. For 6 years after Robert passed, the account sat untouched. Sacred, almost. A thing I hadn't yet found the right purpose for. Then Diane called to tell me she was engaged. And for the first time in years, I thought I understood exactly what Robert's money was meant for. A wedding. A celebration. A gift given freely from a mother's full heart. I had imagined it as something beautiful. A thing I chose to give, not something quietly assumed. Not something taken. And for a little while, just a little while, it really did seem like this wedding might be the beautiful thing I had imagined. It was a Sunday in February, and the house smelled like pot roast and rosemary. Diane had called ahead to say they were coming for dinner, and that she had something to tell me. I knew what it was before she arrived. A mother always knows. I set the table with the good placemats and started the roast at noon. They came through the front door at 5:30, cold-cheeked from the winter air, carrying a bottle of champagne and something that looked very much like happiness. Preston Weston III was taller than I expected. Broad-shouldered, with an easy smile and the slightly panicked eyes of a man trying hard to make a good impression on his future mother-in-law. I liked him immediately for that. Confidence I can take or leave. Effort means something, Deanne was glowing. I had not seen her look that way in years. Not since she was young and everything still felt possible. And the world hadn't yet asked too much of her. She looked like that again. Open. Light. Like herself. We sat around the oak table. The same table where she had spread her homework out every evening for 12 years. And I brought out Robert's crystal glasses. The good ones. The ones I only use when something deserves to be marked. Diane saw them and didn't say a word. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Preston told us how he proposed. It involved a restaurant reservation that fell through, a backup plan that also fell through, and eventually a park bench in the cold, with a ring he'd been carrying in his coat pocket for 11 days. It was clumsy and sweet and entirely real. We laughed until the candles burned low. At some point, I caught myself just watching Diane's face, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the particular way her eyes creased at the corners. She looks like her father when she smiles like that. At the end of the evening, she hugged me on the front porch. The February air was sharp and still, and she whispered, "I want you right next to me, Mom, at the altar, every single moment." I watched their taillights disappear down the dark road. Then I went inside, washed the crystal carefully by hand, and let myself cry, not from sadness, from the feeling of being a family again, after 6 years of quiet. I set Robert's empty champagne glass on the windowsill and left it there. That was February. By March, something had begun to change. So slowly at first that I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. The first sign was easy to miss. Most first signs are Diane called me in March, about 3 weeks after the engagement dinner. She wanted to talk about venues. She had that new voice on. The careful one, each word placed just so, like she was being recorded. I had noticed it a few times since February. I told myself it was wedding nerves. She mentioned that Preston's mother, Patricia Weston, had some ideas about the aesthetic. Something elevated and timeless, Diane said. She laughed a little when she said it, the way you laugh at something you've already agreed to. She asked what I thought about a venue in downtown Columbus. I said it sounded lovely. I didn't ask about the cost. She mentioned it as a footnote, the way you mention the weather. 3 times what we had originally discussed. I let it pass. I told myself every bride gets a little overwhelmed. I told myself Patricia Weston meant well. I told myself this was normal. I was very good at telling myself things that spring. In April, Diane called again. She asked if she and Preston could use my living room for their engagement photo shoot. Warm and homey, she said. A real home, not a studio. I spent 2 days cleaning. I baked the morning they arrived so the house would smell right. I moved the armchair by the window to catch the light the way Robert always liked it. The photographer arrived with Diane and with Patricia Weston. I hadn't known she was coming. Patricia walked through my living room the way people walk through hotel lobbies, assessing. She began moving furniture without asking. She lifted family photographs from the mantel and set them in a stack on the floor. She unzipped a tote bag and began placing decorative items I had never seen before onto my shelves. A linen runner, 2 ceramic vases. Things that belonged nowhere in my home. Then she picked up Robert's photograph. The one in the silver frame that has sat on the side table for 6 years. She set it face down. "We want something cleaner," she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. I walked over and picked Robert's photo back up. I set it upright. Patricia glanced at it once. Then she moved a floor lamp directly in front of it. Diane said nothing. I said nothing either. I went to the kitchen and made tea that no one drank. I told myself it was just a photo shoot. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But when the photos appeared on Diane's social media 2 days later, I barely recognized the room. It looked like a showroom, like somewhere pleasant and anonymous, like nowhere I had ever lived. May arrived, and with it, an email. Diane had forwarded an invoice from a florist. $8,400 for a floral arrangement package. At the bottom, in the notes field, she had typed, "Mom, can you handle this one? We're stretched thin on Preston's side." I sat with that for a day. Then I called her. I kept my voice even. I told her I was glad to contribute to the wedding, but that I would appreciate being part of the conversation before invoices arrived in my inbox, as if they were already my responsibility. She sighed. Not a tired sigh, an impatient one. "Mom, I thought you wanted to help. I'm not trying to stress you out. I just thought, with Daddy's money sitting there, you'd want to use it for something meaningful." Daddy's money. That phrase landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. I paid the invoice. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself that once the wedding was over, things would return to the way they had always been. June came. Then July, 3 more invoices arrived in 6 weeks. The catering deposit, the photographer's second installment. A bill for alterations on Diane's gown. $19,200 in total, delivered in forwarded emails with notes like "Thanks, Mom," or once, nothing at all. Just the invoice, forwarded, as if I were an accounts payable department she had outsourced. I started keeping a notebook. Robert always kept a notebook for numbers. I wrote down every payment, every date, every amount. The total came to $27,600. I had never been shown a budget. I had never been introduced to a single vendor. I had never been asked to sit down and talk through any of it. And somewhere in those weeks, I had begun to notice something else. I had not received an invitation in the mail. I mentioned it to my friend Carol over lunch one afternoon in July. I kept my voice light. Carol set down her fork. "Maggie," she said, "has Diane actually sent you an invitation?" The table between us went very quiet. I changed the subject. But the question stayed with me. August brought the bridal brunch. A restaurant downtown, 12 guests, a private room with white tablecloths and too many flowers. I wore my best blue dress. I spent 2 weeks making Diane a memory book. Photographs from her whole life, from the hospital blanket to her college graduation, with captions I wrote by hand on small cream cards. I was seated at the far end of the table. Diane was at the center. Patricia Weston was immediately to her right. When I presented the memory book, Diane opened it, smiled briefly, and said, "Oh, Mom, this is sweet." Then she set it beside her chair. Patricia presented a custom illustration of Diane and Preston in a gilded frame. The table erupted. People passed it around. Someone said it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. Later, someone gathered the women for a photo. I stood and moved toward Diane. A hand touched my elbow, gentle, redirecting. We're just doing the Westons right now. I stepped back. I held my champagne glass, and I smiled. Because the only thing worse than being humiliated is letting them see that it worked. I drove home alone. I sat in my driveway for 11 minutes. Then I went inside and cooked dinner. $27,600. And I was already being quietly shown the door. I kept waiting for the moment I was wrong about all of it. The moment Diane would call and explain everything, and it would make sense. That moment never came. Instead, what came was a cream-colored envelope on a Tuesday morning in October. I picked up the letter again. My hands were steady. I noticed that. Even with the coffee soaking into the grout between the tiles, even with the broken cup in pieces around my feet, my hands were completely steady. I made myself read the rest. The language was Diane's handwriting, but not Diane's words. I know how my daughter writes. She's direct. She's sometimes careless. These sentences were constructed. Measured. The kind of careful phrasing that comes from someone who has thought through every possible objection and pre-answered it on the page. The letter explained that given the intimate nature of the ceremony and the desire for the wedding to feel cohesive with the Weston family's vision, it would be more comfortable for everyone if I attended a small separate celebration to be arranged sometime after the honeymoon. More comfortable for everyone. I read that phrase twice. I thought about the word everyone. I wondered if it included me, then the letter turned. Same page, same pen, same careful handwriting. A list of remaining vendor balances, catering final payment, floral installment 2, band deposit, venue remainder, transportation. A few smaller items I didn't recognize. The total at the bottom was $38,500. There was a note beneath it. Payment would need to be received within 30 days to avoid deposit forfeitures. I read the number 3 times. Then I stood up, stepped around the broken cup, and walked down the hall to Robert's study. I have not changed that room. His engineering books are still on the shelves in the order he kept them. His reading lamp is still on the left side of the desk. There is a coffee ring on the blotter, from a mug he set down in 2017, that I cannot bring myself to clean. I sat in his chair, the way I sometimes do when I need to think clearly. I opened the small wooden box where I keep important papers. I removed the bank statement for the investment account, and beneath it, still folded on its original crease, was the index card in Robert's handwriting. For Maggie's next chapter. Don't waste it on anything that doesn't make you smile. I held it for a long time. And somewhere in that quiet room, something shifted. Not broke, shifted. The way a bone resets, painful, precise, and permanent. I understand now, completely. Without the fog of hoping I was wrong, they had never seen me as the mother of the bride, not once. Not from the beginning. I was a funding source with the added inconvenience of having feelings. Every invoice forwarded without discussion. Every decision made without my input. Every boundary crossed without apology. It hadn't been carelessness. It had been a calculation. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. Anger, what I felt in that moment, was very quiet. I was clear. For the first time in 8 months, I was completely clear. I set Robert's card back in the box. I closed the lid. I picked up my phone. I did not call Diane. I called my attorney. I had spent 8 months being patient, being generous, being the mother I had always been. That Tuesday morning, I decided to be something different. I decided to be the woman Robert always said I was capable of being. I didn't sleep much that night, but not from grief, from focus. By 6 the next morning, I was at Robert's desk with my laptop and a yellow legal pad. I pulled up every email Diane had ever forwarded me, every invoice, every brief note, every thanks mom, and every silent forward with nothing attached but a dollar amount and a due date. I printed each one. I arranged them in order by date, oldest to newest, the way Robert would have done. Then I went through my bank records and matched every payment to every document. The numbers were clear. $27,600 paid. $38,500 now being demanded. $66,100 total. From an account I alone owned, for a wedding I had been formally asked not to attend. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I reviewed the records one more time. Every payment had come from my personal account. There was no written agreement, no contract, no loan document, no signed understanding of any kind. Just a mother who kept saying yes because she kept hoping things would change. I called Patricia Oakes at 8 o'clock. Patricia Oakes has handled my estate planning for 11 years. She is methodical, plain-spoken, and has the particular gift of making complicated things feel manageable. I noted the irony of her first name and allowed myself a small, private smile. It was the first time I had smiled in days. We met the following morning. I laid the documents on her desk in order. She read through them without interrupting. When she finished, she looked up. "You owe them nothing." 4 words. That was all. But they rearranged something fundamental in my understanding of what came next. She confirmed what I had suspected. Voluntary gifts with no written agreement create no legal obligation. The investment account was mine alone. I was under no legal or financial duty to pay a single remaining dollar. I drove home. I made tea. I sat on the back porch. A cardinal landed on Robert's old bird feeder and sat there for a while, very still, in the thin October light. I did not cry. I got out a piece of paper and made a list. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, and by the time Diane's next email arrived, I was ready. I returned to Patricia Oakes' office 2 days later with my list. She was already at her desk when her assistant showed me in. Silver-framed glasses, a dark blazer, the particular stillness of a woman who has heard every version of family dysfunction and stopped being surprised by any of it. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking and nodded at the chair across from her. I placed my list on the desk between us. We worked through it item by item. She asked precise questions and I gave precise answers. There was no emotion in that room. Just facts, documents, and 2 women who understood exactly what needed to happen next. She drafted the first document while I sat there. A formal written notice to Diane stating that I was withdrawing all future financial support for the wedding, effective immediately. Clean language, no accusations. Just a clear and final statement of fact. The second document was an accounting letter. It noted the $27,600 I had already contributed, confirmed it was given as a voluntary gift with no expectation of repayment, and stated plainly that no further financial obligation existed on my part. Then I told her the third thing I wanted to do. She looked up from her notepad. She studied me for a moment over the rim of her glasses. "I had a feeling you were going to say that," she said. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. It felt strange and necessary, like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. She spent the next hour walking me through the process of restructuring my estate documents. The informal understanding that Diane would inherit the full investment account was removed. In its place, Patricia Oakes helped me establish a charitable remainder trust, directing the principal toward causes Robert had cared about during his life. A children's literacy foundation, an engineering scholarship at the state university. Diane would receive a modest portion, contingent on certain conditions. After my death, it was not punishment. I want to be clear about that. It was clear. It was me finally treating my own future with the same careful attention I had spent a lifetime giving to everyone else's. On Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Diane's apartment building. I did not go upstairs. I left the withdrawal notice at the front desk in a sealed envelope, signed for a delivery confirmation receipt, and walked back to my car. Then I went home and made phone calls, the caterer first, then the photographer, then the florist. I was polite with each of them. I explained simply that I would not be responsible for the outstanding balances on those accounts. I gave them Diane's contact information. I thanked them for their time and wished them well. Not one harsh word. Not one moment of drama. Every payment I had already made was gone, and I accepted that, but I was done. Quietly, completely, and without apology, I was done. Thursday evening, I sat at Robert's desk with my crossword puzzle. At 7:14, my phone rang. Diane. I watched it ring. It rang again. Then a text appeared. "Mom, the caterer just called me. What did you do?" Then Preston's name on the screen. Then a number I didn't recognize called twice in a row. I looked it up afterward. Patricia Weston. I turned my phone face down on the desk. I finished the crossword. I washed my face and went to bed at my usual time. I slept better than I had in 8 months. By Friday morning, there were 11 messages. I listened to them in order, the way you read a document from the beginning. The first 2 were confusing. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What is going on? The third was frustration. The words clipped and tight. The fourth was tears. Mom, we're going to lose the deposits. Please just call me. The fifth was something harder. I don't know what you think you're proving. Then the 6th message, 4 minutes long. And somewhere in the middle of it, Diane stopped performing and just talked, Mom. I don't know what happened. I don't know when things got so wrong. Please just talk to me. I sat with that one for a while. Preston sent a single text. Mrs. Calloway, I think there's been a misunderstanding and I'd like to help resolve it if possible. I appreciated the attempt. It was more than I expected from him. Patricia Weston did not call again after Thursday evening. I noted that without surprise. I agreed to meet Diane on Saturday morning. I set one condition. She would come alone. I arrived first. I ordered a plain coffee and chose a table by the window, where the morning light came in clean and flat. I was on my 2nd sip when she walked through the door. She looked like she hadn't slept since Thursday. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. She was wearing the old college sweatshirt she used to wear on Sunday mornings when she still came home for visits. I hadn't seen that sweatshirt in years. She sat down across from me. She opened her mouth twice. Both times she stopped. I waited. Finally she said, "Why didn't you just tell me you were upset?" I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. "Diane," I said, "I sent back a signed RSVP to my own daughter's wedding and received a letter uninviting me. At what point in that sequence was I supposed to feel welcome to share my feelings?" She looked at the table. The coffee shop moved around us. Someone ordered at the counter. A chair scraped. The world continued, indifferent. Then I spoke again, not in anger. In the quiet, level voice I used for 31 years, when a conversation required more care than volume. I have paid $27,600 toward a wedding I am not invited to attend. I did it because I love you. But love is not a transaction. And I am no longer available to be treated like a silent account that exists to be drawn from. I slid the copy of the withdrawal notice across the table. The remaining invoices are yours and Preston's to manage. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I picked up my coffee. Diane's eyes filled, and in that moment, just that one moment, I saw her. Not the careful performance of the past 8 months, not the Weston-approved version of my daughter. Just Diane. The girl who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms and pressed her cold feet against my legs and fell back asleep within minutes, because she knew she was safe. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for waiting so long." I finished my coffee. I left a tip on the table. I put on my coat, buttoned it to the top, and walked out into the October sunlight. I drove home that morning with the windows down, even though it was cold. Some things, I've learned, you need to feel all the way through. 6 months later, I am sitting on a porch. It faces east. In the mornings, the light comes in low and long across a small garden that I am slowly learning to tend. There are tulips coming up along the left border that I planted in November, not knowing then if I would feel like celebrating spring when it arrived. I do. The cottage is smaller than the house I raised Diane in. Considerably smaller. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window above the sink, a living room that holds everything I actually need and nothing I don't. I sold the family home in December. It was the right decision. Some spaces hold too much history to also hold a future. The porch has 2 rocking chairs. I use one. The other I leave. Carol came last Saturday and we sat out here with tea until the afternoon light shifted and the air got too cool for comfort. We talked about her grandchildren and my book club and the mentorship program I started in January through my former school district, pairing retired educators with teachers in their first 3 years. It was something I had been meaning to do for a long time. I had simply been too busy managing other people's needs to tend to my own. In February, I donated a portion of Robert's investment account to a children's literacy foundation in his name. When the confirmation letter arrived, I read it twice at the kitchen table. Then I took it to the porch and sat with it in the morning light. For the first time since opening that folder in the attorney's office 6 years ago, I felt certain I had understood what he meant. Don't waste it on anything that doesn't make you smile. I smiled for a long time that morning. Diane called on a Sunday in March. It was the first real conversation we had managed in months. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. She told me the wedding had happened. Smaller than originally planned, a number of vendors released, the whole production scaled back considerably once the financing had its own opinion about things. She mentioned that Patricia Weston had become somewhat less involved. I said I was glad the day had come together for her. Then she asked how I was doing, and she waited. Actually, I waited, the silence open and patient, for my answer. I told her about the porch, the garden, the tulips I hadn't been sure about. There was a long pause. That sounds like something Dad would have loved, she said. I looked out at the garden, at the empty chair beside me, at the morning light moving slowly and golden across everything I had chosen to keep. Yes, I said, it does. I think about that conversation often, about how much distance a person can travel in a year and how healing rarely arrives the way you expect it to. Not as a door swinging open, but as a window, cracked just slightly, letting in fresh air. Being a mother is the greatest thing I have ever been. But I had confused being a mother with being invisible. And those are not the same thing. Loving your children unconditionally should never require surrendering yourself completely. Dignity is not something people take from you. It is something you stop handing over. The greatest inheritance I could leave my daughter was not money. It was the example of a woman who finally decided she was worth protecting. I have my porch now. I have my garden and my book club and my Tuesday mornings with nowhere to be. I have the quiet that I once mistook for loneliness and have since learned to recognize as peace. On my porch this morning, the sun came up over the garden, the coffee was hot, and the chair next to mine was empty. But somehow it didn't feel that way at all.